Claire Wren walked briskly through the sterilized corridors of Unity Medical Station 9, her ID badge bouncing against her chest. Her colleagues barely acknowledged her anymore. Whispers followed her like shadows. The human nurse who got too attached. That's what they called her behind sterile smiles. Unity Station was supposed to be a beacon of galactic cooperation, but beneath the polished chrome and translation software, prejudice simmered quietly. Claire had learned to keep her compassion tucked behind protocol, but it still slipped through her voice, her hands, her choices. She had once believed that medicine transcended species, that the cry of a wounded child, be it scaled, feathered, or silicon-blooded, was universal. But she was learning fast. That belief didn't fit the galactic mold. The higher-ups didn't want empathy. They wanted efficiency. Data, not intuition. She was warned after treating a Zephyr Minor for grief-induced cardiac episodes. Warnings turned into evaluations. Evaluations turned into ultimatums. One more, unauthorized intervention, and she'd be discharged. Then came the emergency call, level crimson. The station locked down. Personnel flooded toward the triage bay, only to halt abruptly. Through the reinforced viewing glass, the patient could be seen, a young creature no bigger than a large dog, swaddled in a biocontainment pod. It writhed in pain, iridescent scales cracked and twitching. Deep gashes along its flank oozed blue plasma. A pair of fractured winglets convulsed in pain. A baby Rhizarian. The room froze. Everyone knew what it meant. Rhizarians, dragon-like apex beings with a biological resonance capable of melting steel hulls if agitated. Even infants were volatile. The staff backed away. Orders were to maintain distance until the specialized containment team arrived. Claire didn't move. She heard the mewling. It wasn't a roar or psychic shriek. It was a whimper. The kind that made her remember holding dying puppies on Earth as a girl. Her instincts roared louder than protocols. She moved. "Claire, stand down!" the chief surgeon barked. She didn't hear him. Her fingers danced across the isolation chamber's manual override. The pressure seals hissed, and a horrified chorus erupted behind her. She stepped into the med pod. The dragonling flinched, baring needle-like teeth. But when Claire knelt, palms exposed and voice soft, the creature didn't strike. Its breath hitched. Its spines stopped flaring. She approached slowly, scanning the wounds. Thermal burns. Sliced membranes. Tissue destabilization. Signs of trauma, probably during atmospheric re-entry. She retrieved a dermal stabilizer, bypassing the standard AI interface. The machine kept buzzing error warnings. Unrecognized species. Risk level, lethal. She manually overrode each one. Every touch was calculated but gentle. Every motion calibrated to soothe, not trigger. She cleaned the wounds, applied regenerative foam, and adjusted the pod's temperature to mimic a Rhizarian nest's environment, information she remembered from an obscure xenomedicine course she took years ago, just because she'd been curious. The baby dragon's muscles unclenched. Its eyelids, too thick to be called lids, fluttered. It gave one last weak growl and slipped into unconsciousness. That's when the siren screamed. Security stormed in, weapons raised. The room filled with voices. Claire didn't flinch. She finished sealing the wound before standing slowly, arms raised. The dragonling's pod resealed automatically as the atmosphere normalized. The medical director marched in, flanked by the station's ethics officer and 2 ranking administrators. Their faces were carved from stone. "You disobeyed direct quarantine orders." Claire didn't defend herself. She didn't regret it. Her gaze remained on the creature, now breathing steadily. Alive. "You endangered the station. You endangered yourself. Effective immediately, you are terminated from service and stripped of all certifications under Unity jurisdiction." Her badge was ripped from her chest. "You are to vacate the station within the next rotation. Failure to comply will result in legal action." They turned and left. No one offered her a final word. Even the ones who'd shared drinks with her avoided her eyes. The dragonling slept. The door sealed behind her. Just like that, Claire Wren, registered trauma nurse, Earthborn, loyal to the oath of healing, was cast out. She didn't cry. She didn't speak. As she stepped out into the docking corridor, duffel slung over her shoulder, she looked back once through the glass. The tiny shape in the pod shifted. Its tail flicked weakly. She smiled, just a little. Whatever came next, she knew one thing: it had been the right choice. Claire stepped off Unity Station with no job, no credits, and no destination. The orbital shuttle dropped her at a satellite colony 2 jumps away. No one met her. She rented a capsule room the size of a cargo locker, its walls humming with recycled air and flickering light. Her account balance showed just enough to survive a month on ration packs and filtered water. She sat in silence, staring at her hands, the same hands that had soothed a creature feared by half the galaxy, now labeled dangerous by the system that trained her. She searched for new postings. The job boards refused her credentials. Blacklisted. A red flag blinked beside her name, warning potential employers: unstable, insubordinate, high risk. Hospitals, clinics, freighters, no one answered. Her inbox filled with silence. The medical board had erased her completely. No appeal. No hearings. Just a wall of quiet exile. Whispers followed her even here. In the communal mess hall, alien workers glanced her way and then looked away. Word had spread fast. The one who touched the dragon. Some looked at her with awe. Most with suspicion. Everyone kept their distance. She was a symbol of something they didn't understand, and didn't want to. Claire didn't bother to explain. There was nothing to defend. Nights were harder. She lay awake in the capsule, listening to the station's creaks, thinking about the dragonling's eyes. Intelligent. Afraid. Trusting. That flick of its tail. The way its breathing had calmed under her touch. It haunted her in the best and worst ways. She'd acted on instinct, and now she paid the price in solitude. Memories surfaced. Her father patching up injured birds in their backyard, telling her healing wasn't about rules but heart. She used to believe that. The galaxy didn't. Here, emotion was a flaw, not a strength. Most species viewed it as erratic, dangerous. Humans were tolerated, barely, and only when predictable. She had stepped outside the frame and was punished for it. 3 cycles passed with no change. Her credits dwindled. Hunger sharpened everything: sounds, thoughts, regrets. Then, one night, as she returned from a failed interview for janitorial work, she noticed shadows trailing her. 4 figures, cloaked, moving too deliberately. She ducked into a maintenance shaft, heart pounding. She reached for the small blade hidden in her boot, not for defense, just reassurance. But when the figures stepped into the light, they didn't attack. They knelt. The tallest, cloaked in dark violet, removed their hood. An alien with opalescent scales and vertical pupils regarded her solemnly. Rhysarian. Claire froze. The others followed suit. One carried a sealed data rod, its surface engraved with the crest she recognized from her Xenome training. *** royal mark of the wormspawn lineage ***. The leader spoke through a translator. You treated the prince. You saved him. No debt is greater. Claire's mouth went dry. I just did what was right. That's why you are summoned. Summoned. Her legs went numb. They weren't here to hurt her. They were here to escort her. She asked no questions. The answers were in their eyes. They led her quietly through the night, away from the lights of the colony. A sleek transport ship, unlike any human vessel, waited beyond the ridge. As she boarded, the lead Rhysarian handed her the rod. Your reward was decreed the moment your hands touched royal blood with kindness. The ship doors sealed shut behind her. She sat in the passenger hold, alone again, but not abandoned. As the vessel ascended, breaking atmosphere and warping toward coordinates unknown, Claire looked at the data rod in her lap. She hadn't done it for recognition. But something in the universe had noticed. She closed her eyes, unsure of the path ahead, but certain now that being cast out was not the end. It was the beginning of something the galaxy wasn't ready for. The transport vessel moved in silence, cutting through space like a blade through fog. Claire sat motionless, watching stars blur beyond the window. The Rhysarians spoke rarely, communicating mostly through glances and subtle shifts in posture. She wasn't a prisoner, yet everything around her felt ceremonial, as though each step she took now was being recorded for some greater narrative. They arrived in a system no human had ever set foot in. A nebula bathed in violet and gold surrounded a living world suspended within energy fields. The ship pierced the barrier, descending into a crystalline city grown from volcanic glass and living coral. She wasn't greeted by guards or officials. Instead, an honor procession of silent figures parted, creating a path to a towering chamber carved into a mountainside. Inside, bioluminescent light filtered through the walls. At its center rested the prince. No longer contained, he lay coiled in a nest of silver moss. His wings, partially healed, twitched when he sensed her presence. He raised his head, eyes focusing. His pupils dilated, and a soft pulse ran through the chamber. A wordless signal. Recognition. Rhysarian elders stood encircling him, their presence immense yet still. They watched her approach without expression. One of them, older by centuries, spoke into her mind through resonance. "You were not called for reward. You were called because you are needed." The prince stirred again, his psychic field rippling. He was stable, but distant, as if trapped in himself. The elder explained, his species developed through stages of intense emotional imprinting. Without bonding during early trauma, many fell into feral regression. Claire's act hadn't just saved his body, it had anchored his identity. They needed her to complete it. They led her to the sanctum, a chamber that resonated with psychic energy. Only those the prince accepted could enter. Claire stepped forward, and the field parted. Inside, the walls vibrated with memory. She knelt beside him, meeting his gaze. No words. Just breath. Just presence. He leaned forward and pressed his snout to her palm. A surge passed through her. Not pain, but raw feeling, fear, confusion, recognition, trust. Images danced behind her eyes, fragments of his crash, his pain, her touch, the light he remembered through his haze. And then stillness. The link was made. The elders watched silently. One stepped forward. "You are now the fulcrum." It meant little to her then, but the implications became clear quickly. In Rhysarian culture, the fulcrum was not a caretaker. It was a bridge, a living connection between the crown and the galaxy. A role never given to an outsider. A role only born from necessity or miracle. She wasn't asked if she accepted. It had already been decided, by the prince, by the bond, by the consequences of her defiance. The station had cast her out. The dragons had elevated her. Within days, her duties began. She was taught resonance etiquette, emotional channeling, and deep harmonic communication. She adapted quickly, not because she was trained for it, but because it was instinctual. Rhysarian physiology mirrored emotional waves. Where machines and logic failed, her human intuition connected. She became more than a healer. She became a conduit. The prince followed her constantly. His mood aligned with hers. When she spoke gently, his scales shifted toward soft tones. When she laughed, his tail flicked playfully. His progress was rapid, and the court noticed. What generations of controlled breeding and ritual couldn't accelerate, one act of compassion had sparked. Other races began to take note. Whispers spread beyond the nebula. The dragons had taken a human into their most sacred ranks. Claire's name re-emerged in diplomatic channels, but now not as a scandal, but as mystery. The same nurse dismissed as a liability had become the key to the most powerful lineage in known space. And through it all, she never asked for status. Her focus remained on the bond, on healing, on understanding. Her days were filled with quiet lessons and constant presence. She no longer worked in halls or with tools, but her impact was greater than anything she'd done in hospitals. She didn't wear a uniform. She didn't hold a title. But within the Rhysarian palace, Among beings who once saw humans as unpredictable and crude, Claire Wren had become something rare, essential. The transition from outcast to integral presence in a species once deemed unreachable wasn't smooth. Claire faced a world unlike any she'd known. The Rhizarian culture didn't rely on language in the conventional sense. Their thoughts flowed in pulses, emotions echoed through ambient frequencies, and every interaction required her to listen in ways that had nothing to do with ears or translation tech. Her senses stretched beyond the physical. Her emotions became her voice. Missteps carried weight, not in words, but in tension that changed the temperature of rooms or the pattern of light in walls. She had to relearn communication, not from a manual, but from the prince himself. He taught her without teaching. When he recoiled, she adjusted her state. When he pulsed warmth, she followed it. Over time, their exchanges grew faster, deeper. She sensed meanings behind his posture, memories behind his gaze. He shared flashes of dreams, fragments of starfields, brief images of his kind drifting through their home world skies, raw grief from the crash. She responded with silent companionship, letting him feel her steadiness. Their connection thickened until it no longer needed a trigger. She could enter a chamber, and his presence would shift, aligning to hers immediately. This bond began to affect those around them. Rhizarian elders, long distant and severe, became inquisitive. Some mimicked Claire's behavioral nuances, tilting their heads when confused or mirroring her calm stillness during conflict. One began to wear a human-style satchel, another subtly altered their posture in formal gatherings to match her approachable stance. Claire didn't notice these things at first, but the palace archivists did. They documented everything. Rhizarian cultural evolution had always been slow and insular. Now, it was shifting, visibly, rapidly, around one human. Yet not all welcomed the change. A faction within the royal lineage remained deeply opposed. To them, Claire represented chaos, a deviation from tradition. Her influence on the prince was undeniable, but they saw it as corruption, not enrichment. She heard their resistance not in words but in sudden flickers of psychic static when she passed, in pointed silence during gatherings. She posed a threat they didn't know how to contain. Claire didn't try to win them over. She kept to her purpose, the prince's stability and growth. Every day, he matured, physically, psychically. His instincts, once wild, became sharp and directed. His empathy deepened. He began responding to political dilemmas not with reactive force but with deliberate restraint, guided by echoes of Claire's presence. She hadn't instructed him. She'd simply modeled what compassion looked like. He had internalized it, not as weakness, but as wisdom. Her days began with ritual harmonics, tuning herself emotionally before entering the prince's chamber. It was not about cleansing, but about balance. If she carried frustration or fatigue, he would mirror it. She learned the value of internal clarity, of discipline rooted not in obedience, but in tension. It was a kind of practice no medical training had ever required, but here, it was vital. The Rhizarians began involving her in matters beyond healing. She attended tribunal councils as a silent observer, her mere presence a symbol of stability. Some began sending their young to her for brief emotional calibration, a practice previously unheard of. She remained humble, never asserting authority, never requesting recognition. Still, her influence spread like light through water, subtle but impossible to ignore. An emissary from the United Galactic Alliance eventually arrived. A human, tight-lipped and formal. He addressed her by her full name, then paused, clearly uncertain how to refer to her now. She was no longer Nurse Claire Wren of Unity Station. She was something else, unranked, but indispensable. He offered her reinstatement, quietly, away from the dragon's presence. Medical credentials restored, public apology drafted, a research position on Earth waiting. She refused without hesitation. The prince stirred beside her, not angry, not possessive, simply aware. She wasn't tempted. The system that cast her out had already judged her as expendable. Here, she had become necessary, not for status, but for the future of a species. She remained where she was needed. Where she was seen without translation. where her value wasn't measured by metrics or algorithms, but by harmony in a world once closed to all outsiders. Without ceremony, she continued her work. No recognition followed her. No titles preceded her. Yet the galaxy began whispering again, not in scorn, but in awe. Something was happening in the Rhysarian Empire. And at the center of it all, quietly, was a human whose only crime had been compassion. The first signs came as a ripple in the outer territories. Trade vessels reported unusual frequencies, distorted signals that pulsed with structured intent. Scouts identified patterns, not random noise but messages, probing, measuring, watching. The Rhysarian High Council convened behind sealed chambers. Claire was summoned not by request but by presence. The prince had grown taller, stronger, and quieter. His eyes held a gravity they hadn't before, a silent awareness of something approaching that no one else could feel. Through their bond, Claire felt the edges of it, cold, calculated attention, not curiosity but threat. Something ancient had noticed the young royal's survival and now moved toward him. Claire wasn't a strategist. She had no military rank. But she understood systems, how organisms fought infection, how pressure revealed fracture lines. The Rhysarian elders asked her not for tactics but for insight into the human mind, unpredictable, stubborn, and full of defiant hope. They needed a perspective unshaped by protocol. She offered it not through commands but through questions. What was worth defending if defense meant transformation? What would survival look like if it required sacrifice without conquest? The threat revealed itself in fragments, drones on the edge of systems, organic metallic hybrids that carried no insignia. They didn't speak or broadcast demands. They simply erased. Planets went dark without warning. Observers described them as voids in space, absorbing data and life indiscriminately. The Rhysarian response was swift, calculated, and faltering. Their psychic networks faltered against the enemy's silence. Emotional resonance, their strength, failed against something that did not feel. But the prince felt. Through Claire, he had learned empathy, but also discernment. He understood that survival would not come from matching strength but by becoming something the enemy could not interpret. Claire and the prince worked together in silence, forging a method of communication that mirrored but did not mimic, the creation of emotional encryption. They formed psychic harmonics the machines could not replicate. Each signal they sent carried unique human Rhysarian patterns, rooted in nuance, built on shared memories, feelings, imperfections. It was noise to the invaders, but to the Rhysarians, it became a shield. Other species took notice. Diplomatic envoys arrived seeking explanation. They didn't understand the mechanics, only the results. Worlds aligned with the Rhysarian Empire began adopting the same pattern: emotional encoding, unpredictable resonance pulses, human-assisted calibration. Claire found herself at the center of a growing nexus. Not a commander, not a ruler, but a catalyst. She wasn't giving orders. She was offering examples. The prince stood beside her, his presence now fully formed, his mind sharp. He spoke rarely but with weight, and always in unity with her. The war never had a single battle. It spread like a virus and met its resistance in the same form. The machines failed not because they were weak, but because they couldn't adapt to something irrational. Human unpredictability, Rhysarian empathy, the fusion of logic and feeling, these became weapons, not forged, but lived. Eventually, the incursions slowed. Systems once silenced began transmitting again. The enemy, if it ever had a mind, withdrew or dissolved. There was no victory declared, only breath held and released. The galaxy didn't celebrate in parades, but in cautious rebuilding. Amid that quiet, Claire returned to her work with the prince, not as a symbol, but as herself. He had grown beyond dependency. He now guided others, younger dragons in training, his presence calm and centered. Claire observed, supported, and remained deeply rooted. Her legacy wasn't carved in stone but embedded in the way the next generation led, with emotion, with patience, with curiosity untainted by fear. She received offers, again. Positions, recognition, names placed beside accolades. She declined each one. Her purpose had never been fame. Her impact didn't need titles. In the palace gardens, younger hatchlings came to her instinctively, curling near her presence not because of her reputation, but because of the resonance she carried, trust forged not through power, but through constancy. The galaxy changed slowly, but it changed. Where once humans were tolerated, they were now consulted. Where once compassion was a liability, it became currency. Claire remained at the heart of that shift, not as its architect, but its witness. She never returned to Earth. There was no need. She had built something larger than any past she'd left behind. The station that fired her no longer mattered. The betrayal that exiled her became irrelevant. Her greatest failure, in the eyes of the system, had become the axis around which a new balance formed. She healed a creature. She held her ground. And the stars, ever watching, remembered.